Hey everybody, I'm Joe Price, Wilderness Skills Instructor based here in Sweden, and behind the camera pushing buttons and admiring this birch here is Ida Olsen.
Hello everyone.
We're here today to invite you on a walk in the woods with us where we're going to gather tinder materials, and specifically tinder materials that require no tools to gather, drop a few knowledge bombs and take an instant spark. And we're going to talk about the differences between those two types of tinders in this video. So if you want to join us for this beautiful walk on this beautiful autumn day in Sweden, stick around. One of the most common resources we find in the boreal forest or in the chaga forest is what's behind me here. Well, there's a lot of them behind me here. It's pine, in particular Scots pine. In fact, there's a great saying in Poland that a pine will grow wherever the devil can't do his work. And I think that's a pretty cool one and a bit of folklore for you guys. But some identifying features of a pine, because pine and spruce and larch can tend to look a lot like each other, but there is differences. One of the first things you see are the needles here. Pine needles are very long and they tend to come down to the branches and connect at the bottom there. 2, 3 and 5 connections tells you what type of pine it is, whether it's a red pine, a white pine or a yellow pine. It tends to grow in a circular fashion. You can see here, perfectly round, which unlike its counterpart, spruce will grow, yes, around the tree, but they will be staggered. So pine will always have these beautifully symmetrical rings of growth. The bark itself becomes pretty scaled as it grows older, and it's very distinguishable because you'll have orange scale at the top, orange bark scales, and you'll have dark bark scales at the bottom. Scots pine is probably one of the most valuable resources that we can use to fill up our tinder pouches when we're out collecting tinder. It's also very easy to find things like you see behind me here, big root balls. That means that you can be less invasive when you're collecting from trees. That's again one of the most important things to remember. You're only trying to fill up your little pouch and replace the need for large quantities of stuff with skills and sustainable ways of harvesting the materials to keep your pouch nice and full. So one of the first things I want to show you is a great example of what is on the stump behind me, and that is resin. Just want to explain what is resin for those who've never heard of it before. But you can see on the example that I have here in front of me that a tree is a series of tubes, almost like a stacked pack of straws, for those who remember back in the day when you'd go into restaurants and you would see straws together at the counter that you could pick and put in your drink. That's basically the structure of a tree. It's just they have different sized straws to do different things within the body of the tree. So this is a nice example of it here. Trees don't have arms and legs like us, so when they get attacked or have invaders or species want to live in them or dig within the bark, they need a self-defense mechanism. And one of the ways that the Scots pine does that is by producing a very toxic turpentine filled resin, also toxic to humans, but we've talked about that in other videos. And the way that it does that is if something burrows in between these straws, it releases these resins, oleoresins, that are full of terpenoids and other base kind of chemical compounds to seal the wound, to keep things from getting into it, and also capture the bacteria or the flies within that, almost like a scab or a scar for the tree. So if you want to come in and take a closer look, this tree has actually been wounded before it was felled and has started to produce and release those oleoresins. So here, the oleoresins from this damaged Scots pine that was felled, you can see before it was felled, it was obviously damaged in and around here, and it started to release its oleoresins to try and close up the wound. It is very rich in them around here and they're very scented, and this is a very pure example of an oleoresin from a Scots pine. Some resins have bits of bark material and detritus in it that you'd have to boil and to remove. Some resins come out white and age over time and they end up looking like this, and then the next stage of it is amber. Anybody who's ever seen Jurassic Park will know all about amber, but this is kind of the original source of it. Oleoresins, because they're so full of terpenoids, are incredibly flammable, but you can't just hit this with your ferro rod. You have to process it down and into dust. There is some other flammable materials, like the resin from Douglas fir happens to be a lot more flammable than this, but oleoresins are nice to collect for projects and to have in your tinder kit when you need something to get your fire going. That is an introduction to resins. Pine resin burns kind of not as good as the rest of them, but you can start off with pine. It is the best for crafting. You can start off with pine. It's nice to add a few bits of dust to a tinder bundle, work up to spruce, and then into fir. Fir is always the best kind of resin for volatile liquids for burning. But what happens when oleoresins doesn't come out of the tree? When it's released to the tree and it reacts with air, it becomes resin or amber or grist like you see on the tree there. But sometimes a tree can fall over and still contain all of its oleoresins because it hasn't been damaged. Because it has oleoresins oleoresins flowing up and down the straws of the tree. It tends to, when the tree dies, kind of sanguinate, almost like if you find a bit of roadkill on the ground. All those oleoresins will sanguinate back towards gravity. So down into the root system or down into branches and stuff like that on trees. And here we have an awful lot of root balls overturned from the summer. Now what I've noticed, and one of the things that I notice about searching for fatwood, is I don't go near live trees, but I look at trees that are really old but still in great condition, kind of like me. So a bit fossilized but still haven't actually went away. Also, another great indicator of stuff that contains a large amount of oleoresins is nothing lives on it. So unlike when you see a tree fall over on the ground, you can spot in the distance that maybe there's some mushrooms on it, there's some bark necrosis, there's some mold, there's some decay. But because oleoresins are designed to keep things away and act as a preservative, nobody wants to eat turpentine, you can see that a tree that contains no living life on it, well, there's a good chance that that small section of tree has oleoresin in it and resins. So if you want to take a look down here at the root ball, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's a prime example of a root ball that's come down in a storm quite some time ago. And I take a look around it and I see that there's plenty of life around it, but there is no life on it. It's still old, it's grey, it's starting to kind of fossilize, for want of a better description, and has no life on it. Again, we're always trying to get better forest eyes when we're out and not waste our calories by just sawing into random trees around the place. And the no life fossilized indicator is a fantastic indicator that there is fatwood in there, or resins. First thing I do is I take a nick with my knife and I take a smell. This will smell like Christmas, like all the Christmases combined into one. It is a beautiful, beautiful smell, and it is a very rich orange color, because that is the resins that haven't come out of the tree and are still sanguinating in the tubes and the structure of the tree itself. But this isn't always a fantastic indicator that this is full of fatwood, because when pine, and this is a tip for those who are collecting, when pine gets wet, it looks exactly like this. So you need smell to indicate it too. Once you got good smell and you can feel that it's dry and kind of tacky, the next thing I want to do is I take my saw and I run my saw in and out of it a couple of times, and you'll get this dust. And this dust, you can smell your saw, will also smell very strongly of resins. So there you've got three indicators now. You're stacking the deck in your favor. No life, pine, old, orange resin marks, smells like Christmas, sawed into it a couple of times. You've collected this tacky dust. So then it's time to do the heavy lifting. And I'm going to show you now what it looks like when you do saw into it. You can see here, it looks a lot like bacon, a lot like ham, and that is all the oleoresins that have stayed within the tree and is what's called fatwood, or is also known as fatwood in the wilderness circles. And this is fire gold. You want this in your tinder pouch as much as possible. I'll show you another cross section here. So then I take a smaller chunk, and you can see a great example here of how this has been lying on the forest floor, and it started to sanguinate and collect down nearest to the ground where you got the thickest resin up here. But if this was a tree and the tree was standing up, you would have branches coming off. And this is how you can collect fatwood from standing trees. I don't ever recommend cutting live trees, but if there's dead branches down towards the bottom and it is a serious situation, cutting the knuckles off of the branches can give you a nice chunk of fatwood. So there you go, just to show you the way fatwood collects, the way it likes to collect. You can see it here on the other side. This is absolutely pure thick with it because of how it was lying on the ground. And you can take this off in blocks, and I'm going to show you how to use it now. One way to conserve fatwood or to start a stubborn fire is to flatten off your fatwood either side of it, take the tip of your knife, drill a hole, and take your ferro rod and place it on it. Again, why I like the hexagonal ferro rods is because it gives you, again, a more flatter surface to roll off instead of having this curved surface. So you can get it nice and flat, get it into the divot that you've created. When you light your stick like this, it allows you to easily manipulate and carry around your fire and get it into your tinder bundle. Excellent method. So this is birch, a beautiful tree full of betulins. It's where they get their name from. In the Latin one is the betula oil that flows up and down them. But there's a right way and there's a wrong way, and then there's a worse way to collect material from a birch tree. Birch bark is an amazing source of tinder to add to our tinder pouch. It is waterproof, it is weather resistant, the tree lends itself to some amazing folklore in and around fire from all over the world. But just like we talked about in pine, trees are straws, just big collections of tightly packed straws that contain the blood flow and life force of the tree, how to get water from the root system all the way up to the top. What way I like to think about it is just like a human leg. This is what a tree is. It's got blood flow up and down on arteries. Here we have a terrible example of collecting birch from a tree. An awful lot of us, an awful lot of humans, only ever cross a river at the point where we're at, but we never see how the river starts or how the river ends. It is the same for an awful lot of wood people when we're out and about, that we take bark from a tree, we light our fire, we have our camp, and off we go. And we never get to see the long-term effects of what we're doing. Here, this tree has been completely rounded. So as you can imagine, it is cutting off very vital blood flow to the top of the tree. I can see up into the crown here, and it's not the healthiest crown that you should see on a tree of this age. The crown is very small and very tight because obviously some nutrients aren't getting to the top of the tree like they're supposed to. What the person did here was take their knife and wring the tree completely around here, and then take their knife and score it down here, and then take their knife and score it down here. And yes, when you take this bark off, these score marks might look pretty small, but as the tree starts to create wound wood, it opens up even more. We can get you some nice close-up shots in a moment, and you can see just how open this tree is to infection and damage and parasites. Now, in a survival situation, if you should want to collect some stuff, this is not the best example of it, but this is probably the better way to collect it, is to take a square. If you're going to take a square of actual really thick bark, I only recommend it to be about the size of a cigarette packet. The smaller you can make it, the better. But as you can see on this tree, which is a prime example of it, is that you can take your square out, and you still leave an awful lot of protective bark and an awful lot of blood flow up and around the tree. Just like if you were cutting it off your arm, you don't want to remove a big piece of skin around here. Blood isn't going to get to your hand. But if you remove a square, you still have an awful lot of arteries. But when you get up close and you see this tree here, you can see that even the knife marks on something as small as this have started to open and crack into wound wood and leave the tree damaged. So this is just a prime example we saw out here on a walk, and in fact I see too much of in the woods, is people collecting bark in a very unsustainable way. If you own the trees and you're harvesting for crafts, that is entirely up to your prerogative, but when out in nature, this is just completely unnecessary. And I'm going to show you a much healthier and much safer way to collect the bark for your tinder pouch and for your fire that you need. This is actually one of the best ways to collect birch without damaging the tree, because birch, as it grows, it sheds its skin and it starts to peel its outer layer bark off. And this is super fine, super marginal material that you don't have to damage the tree, you don't have to cut into it, you don't have to work hard to get it off. You can collect a lot of it really fast. And it's very thin, still full of betulance. Nice and dry from the wind. Remember, our high and dry. And you want to collect it. When you get down and you see the bark start to change colour, you don't want to get down to where it looks so super orange because you've kind of gone too far. You just want to peel off these beautiful outer layers for your tinder pouch, and they will take a spark from a ferro rod almost instantly. They don't need any knife work, you don't have to scrape anything, and best of all, you're not damaging this beautiful tree. So what I'm standing in the thicket of here is Camarium angustus millefolium. Its colloquial names are rose bay willow herb if you happen to be in the UK, also fantastic for cordage, and in the rest of the world it's kind of commonly referred to as fireweed. Clue is in the name, But fireweed is a fantastic one to add to our tinder pouch here. As you can see, it gives us an awful lot of cotton wool like surface area to create tinder and create flame off. These are the kind of seed heads, seed forms that the wind comes along and blows away. So if you spot these beautiful pink plants, usually they like this kind of roadside environment where the wind can kind of get them and take them on up through the trenches. But if you spot these pink ones, it's a good one to put on the map, because at this time of the year they make excellent tinder gathering materials. Here is probably one of the most easily identifiable sources of tinder from along the water's edge and when you're in forests. This is the ostrich fern, Meadow stropiopterus. And the reason why you can tell it's an ostrich fern is because it unfurls when it's new, but it's also got these tiny spores on the back of the leaves. And it's one of the most common ferns here in Sweden. But ferns are a great resource for your tinder pouch, as you can see here, because they become dry and crispy, as you can hear here. Bit of ASMR for the microphone folk. They're always up high out of the wind and gather in these huge clumps that you see around me here. But the one tip that I will give for when you're gathering ferns is to try your best to snap them and break them. Ferns, when you grab them, and people have a tendency to grab them and pull them like so and draw up here like you would collect rose bay willow herb or stuff from meadows, but they can be like razor blades. In fact, I have a scar here on this finger and this finger here from when I was at a survival class, and I hastily kept walking around to grab tinder, especially ferns, big bunches like this, and pull them, and it cut me open. So it's always best practice just to snap a handful off, jam them in your tinder pouch, and carry them on to later days. If you do find that things like your rose bay willow herb and your ferns are still a little bit damp from the morning dew and stuff like that, easily just snap them off, stick them in your jacket pocket, or just leave them in the sun to dry for 30 minutes and they'll be good to go. So here we are in a beautiful meadow, and I want to talk a bit about meadow resources, because not everything that is dry and small will take an instant spark like the stuff I've shown you previously in the video. But what you will find in meadows is stuff that allows your flame to extend from your birch bark or your rose bay willow herb or your resins or your fatwoods. One of the things you find in meadows, and we'll start from the top and work our way down, is things like dry leaves on trees like this that are very easy to get. And again, as always with these fine materials, 30 minutes in the sun and a bit of time in the wind, and they'd be nice and dry to sprinkle around your ferns and everything else that you need. The next best thing that you can find is these wide hold on a sec, this is going to be a hard one, boys, stay with me. Wide bladed grasses. There we go. Your wide bladed grasses, things like wood rush and sedge, make excellent bird's nest material. Again, will not take a spark directly from a ferro rod unless they're extremely dry, but a great extender to the flame that you've created with your other materials, such as wide bladed grasses in the meadows. Another one that you can collect is grass like this, which you see here, this kind of tall meadow grass. You don't want any of the longer stems. You just want this fine, fluffy, marginal material up here. And again, like I talked about with ferns, you don't want to ever collect grasses by pulling your hand up along it, because it will cut you. Eventually, you might get away with it once, but there will be a time that it will cut you. It's very easily separated. Just pull a big stalk out of the ground, pinch and twist, and you'll separate. And you get these beautiful, beautiful, fine, marginal pieces of dry grass that's been up in the wind and up in the sun. Now, Joe, why don't we want the rest of the grass for our tinder bundle or for our tinder materials? Well, one, down the bottom of these, you can touch it off your cheek and you'll feel that it's wet and it's very cold, and it just takes a long time to dry out. And with a resource such as abundant as grasses are, it's not something that we necessarily want on our tinder bundle. And you see, it still has this epicular wax, which I want to talk about now. It's very hard to pull apart. You can see that it's damp and it's messy. The reason why we don't want these kind of longer stalks, grass, when you pick it up, has this fine coating on it, this waxy layer, this epicular wax. In fact, if you've ever blown a tinder bundle like this up into flames and it's just got smoke and smoke and smoke and smoke, it's because you're burning off all that waxy substance. Grass, when it's prepared properly and collected properly, should just take a flame, no problem at all, and just go up. So avoiding the epicular wax on the stems of these long grasses is just better to be avoided, unless you live in somewhere very arable like the desert. But that's what I find about meadows, and that's what you need to think when you're kind of foraging in meadows for tinder material, that yes, it is small, it is marginal, it is technically classed as tinder, but very few things in a meadow will take an instant flame from a ferro rod or a lighter, but they are fantastic for extending the flames of your ignition sources. So there you have it for us, family. A quick walk in the woods where we filled up our tinder pouch, and of course the fun thing about filling up a tinder pouch is using the tinder you collect. I will say that at this time of the year it's very moist, so it's always better to put your stuff in a tinder pouch and dry it out when you can. So until the next video, thank you for all you do. Like and subscribe. Please check out our friends down below and show your support. Peace.